I am Daniela, 32 years old, the younger of two daughters. For as long as I can remember, I lived in the shadow of my sister, Sarah the golden child, the one everyone adored. My mother never missed a chance to remind me of the comparison, her words like tiny knives carving into me year after year. That night, at our family dinner table, the weight of 2 decades came crashing down. Mom looked straight at me, her voice sharp as glass. "You will never be as good as your sister." The room froze. My father set down his fork. Sarah's perfect smile faltered. And for the first time in my life, I didn't swallow the hurt. Something inside me snapped, something fierce, unshakable, long overdue. I rose from my chair, my voice steady but blazing with the fire of 20 years of silence. The words I had buried deep, the ones I never thought I'd dare to say, finally broke free. And when I finished, the room was left in stunned silence, my mother's face pale, my sister's eyes wide. That night didn't just change dinner. It changed the trajectory of my entire life. Because from that moment on, I was no longer the quiet shadow of Sarah. I was Daniela, seen, heard, and unstoppable. I took my painting back to my room and slid it under my bed, where many of my not-good-enough creations would eventually gather dust. My elementary school graduation day was another stark reminder of the disparity in how our achievements were viewed. I had worked hard all year and received mostly B's with a couple of A's mixed in. As I walked to the car after the ceremony, my report card in hand, my mother scanned the grades and sighed. Sarah was getting straight A's plus by your age, Daniela. If you just applied yourself a little more, you could do better. I remember looking at the ground, watching my shiny graduation shoes scuff against the pavement. The pride I had felt moments before, evaporating like morning dew under a harsh sun. It was my father who often served as my emotional lifeline during these years. Unlike my mother, he seemed to see me for who I was, not who I failed to be in comparison to Sarah. He would sit with me as I drew, asking questions about my creations and sometimes even requesting specific drawings for his office. One night, after a particularly difficult day of comparisons, he came to my room and sat on the edge of my bed. "You know, Danny," he said. "Using the nickname only," he called me. "Not everyone is meant to shine in the same way. Some stars are bright and obvious, like the North Star. Others might seem less noticeable at first, but when you really look, they can have colors and qualities all their own." I did not fully understand what he meant then, but his words gave me comfort. At least one person in my family saw something valuable in me. Despite these moments of support, the consistent message from my mother and the subtle reinforcement from extended family and teachers was clear I was living in. Sarah's shadow and my own light was dim by comparison. I developed coping mechanisms early. I became adept at smiling and nodding when people asked about my sister's latest accomplishment. I learned to redirect conversations away from academic comparisons. Most importantly, I built a private internal, a world where I promised myself that someday, somehow, I would find something I could excel at, something that would make my mother look at me the way she looked at Sarah. But as each year passed, that promise became harder to believe. The gap between Sarah's achievements and my own seemed to widen rather than narrow. And while a part of me began to accept that I might never measure up, another part still desperately yearned for my mother's approval. By the time I finished elementary school, I had developed a complex relationship with achievement and recognition. I both craved it and feared it, knowing that whatever I accomplished would inevitably be measured against Sarah's gold standard. Still, I held on to hope that middle school would be different, that I would finally find my place to shine. That hope, like many before, it would prove more complicated than my young heart anticipated. The summer before I entered 8th grade marked a significant turning point in our family dynamic. Sarah had not only been accepted to Harvard University, but she had received a full academic scholarship. Our house transformed into celebration central, with relatives and family friends constantly visiting to congratulate her and my parents. I remember the party my mother threw our living room adorned with crimson and white decorations, Harvard memorabilia prominently displayed on every surface. As I helped arrange platters of food, I overheard my mother telling her friends, "We always knew Sarah was destined for greatness." From the moment she started talking in complete sentences at 18 months, we just knew. I was 13, awkwardly navigating the early stages of adolescence while feeling increasingly invisible in my own home. That night, as guests fawned over Sarah, I slipped away to my room, turned up my music, and began sketching aggressively in my notebook, the pencils sometimes tearing through the paper. When school started that fall, something in me had shifted. The eager-to-please student disappeared, replaced by a girl who no longer saw the point in trying. My grades, which had never been stellar but were at least respectable, began to slide. C's and even a few D's appeared on my report cards, each one met with increasing disappointment and frustration from my mother. By mid-semester, I was called to the guidance counselor's office. To my mortification, my mother had arranged the meeting. She sat primly in one of the office chairs, her back straight, hands folded in her lap, expression grim. "Daniela has always been a bit of an underachiever compared to her sister," she explained to Mr. Wilson, the counselor, as if I was not sitting right there. "But this recent behavior is concerning. Her sister was class president by this age, and preparing for advanced placement courses." Mr. Wilson, to his credit, tried to redirect the conversation. "Every student has their own journey, Mrs. Williams. Why do not we talk about Daniela's interests and strengths?" But my mother was not interested in that conversation. The meeting ended with a behavior improvement plan that involved weekly progress reports and restricted privileges until my grades improved. It was around this time that I discovered a new outlet for my creativity and rebellion. The local community center offered weekend art workshops, and I began experimenting with urban art styles, fashion sketches, and mixed media that felt worlds away from the Warburton round. Traditional still lives and landscapes my mother thought constituted real art. My wardrobe gradually transformed too. Gone were the preppy outfits my mother preferred, replaced by thrift store finds, band t-shirts, and accessories that made me stand out rather than blend in. I dyed a purple streak in my hair, a decision that resulted in a 2-week grounding and an endless lecture about respecting my appearance. "What will people think?" my mother lamented. "Sarah never went through a phase like this." Maybe that is the problem, I shot back. Maybe I am tired of hearing about what Sarah would do. My social circle shifted, as well. I gravitated toward other creative outcasts who did not fit the conventional mold of success. My best friend Emily became my lifeline during these turbulent years. With her green-tipped hair and passion for photography, she represented everything my mother disapproved of, which made our friendship all the more valuable to me. "Your mom has Sarah goggles on," Emily told me one afternoon as we sat on the bleachers after school, avoiding going home. "She cannot see past her perfect firstborn to realize she has another awesome daughter who is just awesome in different ways." Those words stuck with me, providing a framework for understanding the dysfunction in our family that did not require me to be the problem. Despite my apparent academic apathy, I continued to develop my artistic skills in secret. When my high school announced a student fashion design competition during my sophomore year, I worked for weeks on my entry, staying late after school, and working at Emily's house to keep it hidden from my mother. The day of the announcement, I could barely contain my excitement when my name was called as the first-place winner. My design, a reimagined vintage, inspired dress with modern architectural elements, had impressed the judges from the local art college who oversaw the competition. That evening, I burst through the front door, trophy and certificate in hand, ready to finally share an achievement my mother could be proud of. "Mom," I called out, finding her in the kitchen preparing dinner. "Won first place in the design competition." She looked up from the vegetables she was chopping, her expression more confused than pleased. "The what?" "The fashion design competition. At school." "Look." I held out the trophy. A small figure holding a swatch of fabric aloft. She put down her knife and wiped her hands on a towel, examining my prize with a frown. "I did not even know. You entered a competition. When did you work on this? Is this why your algebra grade slipped to a C- last month?" My heart sank. "Does it matter?" "I won." "Mom, out of the whole school!" She handed the trophy back to me with a sigh. Daniela, if you spent half the time on your academics that you do on these art projects, you might actually have a future like your sister. Sarah was already preparing for college entrance exams by your age, not wasting time on hobbies. Something snapped inside me then. It is not a hobby. It is what I am. Good at. What I love. Why cannot you see that? What I see is potential being wasted, she replied coldly. These little creative projects will not get you into a good college or provide a stable future. They're not little projects to me. I shouted, my voice cracking with emotion. And maybe I do not want Sarah's future. Maybe I want my own. It was our first real confrontation. The first time I had openly challenged her vision of who I should be. I ran to my room and slammed the door, clutching my trophy and sobbing into my pillow. My father came in later, sitting quietly on the edge of my bed and placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. She just wants what is best for you, he said softly, though I could hear the doubt in his voice. No, I replied through tears. She wants what is best for Sarah. She wants another Sarah. That night marked a turning point in my relationship with my mother. The unspoken tension between us had finally found its voice, and there would be no going back to polite pretending. The situation grew increasingly strained. When Sarah graduated summa cum laude from Harvard and immediately secured a position at a prestigious law firm in Boston. Once again, our home became a shrine to Sarah's achievements, framed diploma law firm offer letter displayed on the refrigerator. Constant phone calls from relatives congratulating my parents on raising such an exceptional daughter. All the while, I was preparing for my own graduation, applying to colleges with strong art and design programs, and trying to chart a course that felt true to myself. But with each step I took toward my own future, I felt the weight of comparison growing heavier, threatening to crush the fragile sense of identity I was building. When my college acceptance letters arrived, I received good news. From several art schools, including a partial scholarship to the State University's respected design program. It was not Harvard, but it was exactly where I wanted to be. I imagined my mother would at least acknowledge this achievement, but her response was predictably underwhelming. State University, she said, eyebrows raised. She looked over the acceptance letter. I suppose it is better than community college, though Sarah had offers from Ivy League schools across the board. I had anticipated this reaction and was surprised to find it hurt less than expected. Perhaps I was finally developing immunity to the constant comparisons. Or maybe I had simply reached the limit of how much I could care about her approval. Move-in day at the university dorms brought a sense of liberation I had never experienced. My small but bright room, shared with a music major named Zoe, who spent most of her time at practice rooms, became my sanctuary. For the first time, I could decorate my space exactly as I wanted, work on my designs at any hour and exist, without the looming shadow of Sarah's perfection. The first few weeks of classes were overwhelming but exhilarating. I found myself surrounded by people who thought visually, who valued creativity and original perspectives. In my Introduction to Fashion Design course, I met Professor Linda Carter, a former designer for major fashion houses who had returned to academia to nurture new talent. After our third class, she asked me to stay behind. My stomach tightened, conditioned to expect criticism when singled out by authority figures. Your preliminary sketches show real promise, Daniela, she said, flipping through my side work. There is a distinctive point of view here, raw but with strong instincts for proportion and unexpected detail. I stood frozen, unsure how to respond to praise that felt so foreign. Thank you, I finally managed. I see a lot of students with technical skill, she continued, but fewer with authentic vision. Keep developing this voice. It is what will set you apart in this industry. I walked out of that classroom feeling taller somehow, as if her words had physically straightened my perpetually hunched shoulders. Someone who knew what they were talking about. I saw value in my work, not in comparison to anyone else, but on its own merits. As the semester progressed, I began to find my rhythm academically and socially. I joined the university's fashion society and made friends with other design students who shared my passion. For projects, I developed a Style that blended structured tailoring with unexpected materials and street art influences a combination. Professor Carter encouraged me to refine. In my sophomore year, I met Jason in a color theory class. He was studying graphic design, quiet, but with a quick wit that emerged once you got to know him. Unlike the guys I had casually dated in high school, Jason was genuinely interested in my work and ambitions. He would sit for hours in the studio while I draped fabric on dress forms, offering thoughtful feedback and bringing me coffee during late-night creative sessions. Our relationship developed slowly, built on friendship and mutual respect. He never made me feel like I was competing for attention or validation, something I had not realized was possible in a relationship. Despite the positive changes in my life, the weekly phone calls with my mother remained an exercise in patience. She would ask perfunctory questions about my classes before inevitably steering the conversation towards Sarah's latest accomplishments. Sarah just closed her first major case. She would announce the partners are already talking about fast-tracking her career. Or Sarah and Michael just put a down payment on a condo in Beacon Hill at her age. Can you imagine when Sarah got engaged to Michael, a successful corporate attorney she met at her firm? My mother spent our entire call describing the proposal, and the prestigious connections of Michael's family. You should really talk to your sister about how she managed to find such a good match, my mother suggested. Maybe she could introduce you to some of Michael's colleagues. I glanced at Jason, who was sketching at my desk, oblivious to my conversation. I am seeing someone, Mom, I said. I have mentioned Jason several times. Oh, the art student? She replied, her tone making it clear what she thought of that. Well, that is nice for now, dear. The implied temporariness of my relationship was typical of how she viewed my life choices: transitional, experimental, eventually to be replaced by more sensible decisions that aligned with the Sarah template of success. By my junior year, I had established myself as one of the standout students in the design program. My work had been featured in the department's showcase exhibition, and Professor Carter had selected me for a competitive teaching assistant position. I was building a portfolio and beginning to think about internships that could launch my career after graduation. Then came the announcement of the National Student Design Competition, an annual event that attracted entries from top design schools across the country. The winner would receive a cash prize, and more importantly, an opportunity to have their work seen by industry professionals. I spent months developing my collection for the competition, pushing myself to create pieces that were both innovative and wearable. Jason and my friends witnessed the evolution of my designs, offering encouragement during moments of doubt and celebrating small victories along the way. The night before I was scheduled to submit my final portfolio, my phone rang. It was my mother calling for our weekly check-in. Hi, Mom, I answered, pinning a final piece of my presentation board. Daniel, did you hear about Sarah's promotion? She will be the youngest senior associate in her firm's history. That is great, I said automatically. The response ingrained after years of practice. We are just so proud. Your father and I were saying how all those late nights studying have really paid off for her. There was a pause and I knew what was coming next. How are your classes going? Still doing those fashion projects? I took a deep breath. Actually, I am just finishing my entry for the National Student Design Competition. It is a really big deal in the industry. Oh, she said, her voice flat. Well, do not get your hopes up too high, honey. These creative fields are so competitive and not everyone has a natural talent like your sister has for law. There is no shame in being realistic about your prospects. I closed my eyes, phone pressed to my ear, surrounded by the evidence of months of hard work and growth. Thanks for this encouragement, Mom, I said, not bothering to hide the sarcasm in my voice. I am just being honest, Daniela. Not everyone can be exceptional like Sarah. Sometimes being average is perfectly fine. After we hung up, I sat motionless for several minutes, her words echoing in my head. Then, with deliberate movements, I returned to my work, channeling the hurt into a final push to perfect my submission. As I completed the last details, I made a promise to myself whether I won or lost this competition, I would no longer measure my worth through my mother's eyes. It was time to be the authority on my own value. I graduated from State University with honors in design, achievement that felt monumental to me, but was acknowledged by my mother with only a brief "that is nice, dear," before she returned to discussing Sarah's latest courtroom victory. The graduation ceremony itself was pleasant, enough with my father beaming proudly and even Sarah making the trip to attend, though my mother managed to mention at least 3 times how Sarah had graduated summa cum laude from Harvard. Armed with my degree and portfolio, I secured an entry-level position at Meridian Designs, a small but respected studio that created costumes for independent films and smaller theater productions. The pay was minimal, barely enough to cover my share of rent in the 2-bedroom apartment I found with a fellow graduate, but it was a foot in the door of an industry notoriously difficult to break into. My first months in the professional world were a harsh adjustment. The glamour I had associated with fashion design was quickly dispelled by the reality of tedious tasks, tight deadlines, and demanding clients. Most days were spent making minor alterations to existing designs or sourcing materials within impossibly tight budgets. Meanwhile, Sarah had been promoted again, becoming the youngest partner in her firm's history. My parents threw a celebration complete with champagne and catered food, which I attended with a fixed smile and a growing knot in my stomach. The contrast between her corner office with a view of the Boston skyline and my crowded workroom in a converted warehouse could not have been more stark. "How is the costume job?" Sarah asked me during that party, making an effort to show interest in my life. "It is design, not just costumes," I corrected automatically, "and it is challenging, but I am learning a lot." She nodded sympathetically. "Well, everyone has to start somewhere. I am sure you will move up eventually." Even from Sarah, who I believed meant well, the comment stung. There was always the implication that my path was somehow less valid, less impressive, a stepping stone to something that more closely resembled her version of success. The financial reality of my chosen career became increasingly apparent in the months that followed. While Sarah was purchasing her first home, I was counting pennies to make rent and juggling credit card payments. Jason and I had been dating steadily throughout this period, his own career in graphic design progressing somewhat more lucratively than mine. But the stress of financial insecurity began to strain our relationship. "Maybe you should consider a more commercial direction," he suggested one evening after I vented about a particularly difficult day at work. "There is nothing wrong with designing for retail, at least it pays better." "That is not why I got into this," I replied, frustrated that even he did not seem to understand. "I do not want to create disposable fashion that ends up in landfills after one season." "I know, but you also need to live," he said gently. "You can barely afford groceries right now." The argument escalated, touching on deeper issues of ambition, practicality, and our different perspectives on career success. It was our first serious fight, and though we reconciled, something had shifted. 2 months later, after more tension and increasingly frequent disagreements, we decided to take a break that eventually became a permanent separation. Heartbroken and questioning my choices, I threw myself even more intensely into my work. I stayed late at the studio, volunteered for the most challenging projects, and spent weekends developing my own designs, refusing to give up on the vision that had sustained me through years of doubt. The turning point came unexpectedly. Meridian was contracted to create costumes for an experimental theater production, and due to budget constraints and a tight timeline, I was given more responsibility than usual. I designed a series of transformative garments that could be modified on stage to represent character evolution using techniques I had developed in my personal work. Opening night arrived and I stood nervously in the back of the theater watching as the actors brought my designs to life. The audience gasped audibly during a particularly dramatic transformation scene. And at the after-party, the director made a point of publicly acknowledging my contribution. "The costumes were characters themselves tonight," he said, raising a glass in my direction. "Daniela Williams has created something truly special here." Among the attendees was a local fashion blogger who approached me for an interview about my design process. The article she published the following week caught the attention of Emma Wilson, a well-established designer known for her avant-garde creations and commitment to sustainable practices. To my shock, Emma emailed me directly, expressing interest in my work and inviting me to show her my portfolio. Our coffee meeting turned into a 3-hour conversation about design philosophy, innovation, and the future of fashion. By the end, she had offered me a position on her small but influential design team. The salary was still modest by most standards, but it represented a significant improvement in both my financial situation and professional standing. More importantly, it was validation from someone whose opinion I deeply respected. I called my parents that evening, eager to share what felt like my first significant professional breakthrough. Emma Wilson, my mother repeated after I excitedly explained who she was and the opportunity I had been offered. I have never heard of her. Is this still costume work? No, Mom. This is high-end fashion design. Emma's work has been featured in Vogue and worn on red carpets. This is a really big deal. Well, that sounds nice, she said, her tone suggesting the opposite. I suppose you were lucky to meet her at that theater thing. It was not luck, I said, my excitement curdling into familiar disappointment. She sought me out because she was impressed by my work. My mother hummed non-committally. Speaking of impressive work, did Sarah tell you about her latest case? She is representing that technology company in the big antitrust suit. It has been in all the papers. I ended the call shortly, after promising myself that this would be the last time I sought her approval. My father called back 10 minutes later. I just wanted to say congratulations, Danny, he said warmly. I looked up this. Emma Wilson and her designs are remarkable, different like your work. I am proud of you for catching her eye. His support meant everything. A small island of validation in a sea of indifference. But as I prepared to start my new position, I could not help wondering if I would ever stop measuring my achievements against the impossible standard of Sarah's success, or if my mother would ever see my path as anything but a pale shadow of my sister's brilliance. 6 months into my position with Emma Wilson's design team, I received an invitation that filled me with equal parts obligation and dread. My mother's 60th birthday dinner. Under normal circumstances, I might have found an excuse to send my regrets, but my father's voice on the phone had that particular tone that told me my absence would hurt him deeply. It would mean a lot to your mother, Danny, he said. Sarah and Michael are coming in from Boston. It will be the whole family together. So, I found myself on a Friday evening, in early autumn, parking my second-hand car in the driveway of my childhood home, steeling myself for the inevitable comparisons and subtle put-downs that characterized family gatherings. I had brought a carefully selected gift, a vintage silk scarf in my mother's favorite colors that I had found at an estate sale and professionally restored. It was thoughtful, but within my limited budget, though. I knew it would pale next to whatever extravagant present Sarah would undoubtedly provide. The house looked exactly as it always had, meticulously maintained and decorated with tasteful restraint. As I walked up the path to the front door, I could already hear voices inside the familiar cadence of my family's conversation, bringing both comfort and anxiety. Sarah answered my knock, looking as polished and put together as ever in a tailored dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. But her smile seemed genuine as she pulled me into a hug. Daniela, you look great, she said, stepping back to examine me. I love your outfit. Is that one of your designs? I nodded, surprised by her interest. The dress I wore was indeed my own creation, a simple but distinctive piece with architectural details at the shoulders made from repurposed vintage fabric. The structure is amazing, she continued. You have to tell me about your new job. Before I could respond, our mother appeared in the hallway behind Sarah. Daniela, you are finally here, she said, moving forward to offer her cheek for the obligatory kiss. We were about to start the appetizers without you. Sorry, traffic was heavy coming out of the city, I explained, though I had actually been precisely on time. Happy birthday, Mom. Dinner proceeded as expected at first. My father had prepared my mother's favorite meal, and the conversation revolved primarily around Sarah's work and her life with Michael in Boston. I picked at my food, offering appropriate responses when directly addressed, but otherwise fading into the background, as I had learned to do years ago. Then, over the main course, Sarah cleared her throat and exchanged a meaningful glance with Michael. "Actually, we have some news," she announced, her face glowing with excitement. "I have been promoted to lead counsel for the firm's international division." My parents erupted in congratulations, my mother actually clapping her hands together in delight. And Sarah continued her smile, widening. "We are expecting. I am 3 months pregnant." The news of my impending niece or nephew momentarily overshadowed even the impressive career announcement. My mother's eyes filled with tears as she rushed around the table to embrace Sarah while my father beamed with grandfatherly pride. I offered my own sincere congratulations, genuinely happy for my sister. Despite the familiar twinge of inadequacy, her achievements always inspired. "A toast, my father declared, raising his glass. To Sarah and Michael and to the newest member of our family." We all raised our glasses, my mother dabbing at her eyes with her napkin. "My first grandchild," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Sarah, you have always made us so proud, and now this, it is perfect." As the excitement settled and conversation returned to details of Sarah's pregnancy and plans for the baby's room, I found myself wanting to contribute something positive to the evening. Despite years of disappointment, some childish part of me still craved my mother's approval. "I actually have some news too," I said during a lull in the conversation. All eyes turned to me and I felt a nervous flutter in my stomach. One of my designs has been selected for inclusion in the New York Fashion Week showcase for emerging designers. There was a moment of silence before Sarah spoke. "Daniela, that is incredible. New York Fashion Week is huge." My father reached over to squeeze my hand. "Congratulations, Danny. When is it we should all try to be there?" "It is next month," I replied, warmed by their reactions. "It is just one piece in a group showcase, but it is a big opportunity for exposure." I looked toward my mother, hoping for some sign of enthusiasm. Her expression was polite, but noticeably less animated than it had been moments before. "Is that?" So she asked. "Well, that sounds nice. Is it the main event or some sort of sideshow?" The dismissiveness in her tone was so familiar, it almost did not hurt anymore. Almost. "It is part of the emerging designers platform," I explained, keeping my voice even. "Many successful designers got their start there." She nodded, her interest clearly waning. "I suppose any exposure is good in your field." She turned back to Sarah. "Now, about the baby shower. I was thinking we could host it here, maybe with a garden theme since the due date is in spring." The conversation moved on as if my news had been nothing more than a minor interruption. I fell silent again, pushing food around my plate and wondering why I had bothered to share my achievement at all. Later, as we moved to the living room for coffee and birthday cake, my parents began discussing plans for their upcoming 40th wedding anniversary. "We were thinking of renting a venue," my father explained. "Nothing too elaborate, but something nice to mark the occasion. Those places charge a fortune these days," my mother said, frowning. "I was looking at the gardenia room, but their minimum is $3,000, not including food or drinks." "I could contribute," Sarah offered immediately. "Consider it part of your anniversary gift." "That is very generous, sweetie," my mother beamed. "Michael's firm must be treating you well." "We are comfortable," Sarah acknowledged modestly. "And we want to help make it special for you both." My mother turned to me, eyebrows raised, expectantly. "And what about you, Daniela? Will you be contributing as well?" The question was loaded with awareness of my financial limitations, which she had never bothered to understand were a normal part of establishing oneself in a creative industry. "I can help with the planning and design elements," I offered. "I could create custom invitations and decorations that would cost a fortune if you hired someone." My mother's expression tightened. "I was thinking more of financial assistance, Daniela. Your sister is offering to help with the actual expenses." "I know what Sarah is offering," I replied, a edge creeping into my voice. "I am offering what I can, which is not much," my mother said with a a dismissive wave of her hand. As usual, the room grew uncomfortably quiet. Michael suddenly became very interested in his coffee while my father shot my mother a warning look that she ignored. I do not understand why you insist on struggling in this fashion hobby when you could have pursued something practical, she continued. Your sister was practical and look at her now. Senior position, beautiful home baby on the way. You could have had all that too if you had applied yourself properly. I felt heat rising in my face. Fashion design is not a hobby, Mom. It is my career, a career I have worked incredibly hard for. Working hard at the wrong thing is still wasted effort, she replied. Let us be honest, Daniela. You will never be as good as your sister. I think I have finally accepted that fact. Perhaps you should too. The words hung in the air like a slap. 20 years of comparisons, disappointments, and diminished achievements crystallized in that single brutal statement. I looked around the room. Sarah appeared mortified. My father stunned into silence. My mother sat primly on the Burmans, edge of her chair, her expression suggesting she had simply stated an obvious truth that everyone had been too polite to mention. Something shifted inside me in that moment. The hurt was still there, but it was overshadowed by a sudden, surprising clarity. I stood up slowly, my hands steady, despite the emotions churning inside me. If I will never be as good as Sarah, I said, my voice calm and clear, then perhaps you should ask her to pay your bills. The silence that followed was absolute. My mother's mouth opened slightly in shock, her cheeks flushing with color. Excuse me, she finally managed. You heard me. I continued, finding strength I did not know I possessed. If Sarah is your measuring stick for success and value in this family, then direct all your expectations her way. Ask her to fund your anniversary party. Ask her to validate your life choices. Ask her to fulfill whatever dreams you had that I apparently keep failing to meet. I took a deep breath. Years of suppressed thoughts. Finally finding voice. For 20 years, I have tried to make you see me, not as a comparison to Sarah, but as my own person with my own talents and dreams. But you have never been interested in who I actually am, only in who I fail to be. That is not true, my mother protested weakly. I just want what is best for you. No, I shook my head. You want what is best for you. You want the prestige of having two Harvard-educated, conventionally successful daughters you can brag about to your friends, but that is not who I am and it is not who I want to be. I turned to Sarah, whose eyes were wide with a mixture of surprise and what looked like dawning respect. Sarah, I love you and I am genuinely happy for your success. But Mom has used you as a weapon against me my entire life and I cannot pretend anymore that it does not hurt. To my surprise, Sarah stood up and moved to my side. She is right, Mom, she said quietly. You have always compared us, and it has not been fair to Daniela. Do you know how much pressure I have felt knowing you were using my achievements to make her feel inadequate? Do you have any idea how that has affected our relationship as sisters? My mother looked genuinely confused, as if the possibility that her behavior had damaged both her daughters had never occurred to her. I just always pushed you both to excel, she said, defensively. No, my father finally spoke, his voice unusually firm. You pushed Sarah to excel in ways you valued, and you pushed Daniela to be Sarah. That is not the same thing, Elizabeth. The use of my mother's first name, something my father rarely did in family settings, underscored the seriousness of the moment. My mother looked at him, betrayal written across her features. I have sat by too long watching this dynamic, he continued. I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere with how you parented, but I was wrong. I should have spoken up years ago when I saw how your constant comparisons were hurting. Daniela. My mother's face crumpled slightly, though, whether from genuine remorse or simply from being confronted. I could not tell. I felt suddenly exhausted. Decades of emotional suppression taking their toll now that the dam had broken. I think I need some air, I said, moving toward the front door. No one tried to stop me as I stepped outside into the cool evening, closing the door behind me with a soft click that somehow felt like the period at the end of a very long, complicated sentence. I sat on the front steps, breathing deeply and feeling simultaneously lighter and terrified. I had finally said the words I had been holding back for most of my life, but I had no idea what would happen next. Would this be the end of my relationship with my mother? Had I irreparably damaged our family? Or was there some possibility, however, small, that this confrontation might lead to healing? As I gazed up at the emerging stars, I realized that regardless of what happened next, I had finally stood up for myself and my worth. For the first time in my life, I had refused to accept the narrative that I was a lesser version of my sister. Whatever came next, I would face it as Daniela on my own terms, no longer defined by who I was not. The week following my outburst, at my mother's birthday dinner, passed in a blur of emotions and uncertainty. I threw myself into work, grateful for the demands of preparing for Fashion Week that kept my mind occupied during daylight hours. At night, however, I would lie awake replaying the scene in my mind, alternating between vindication and guilt, relief and anxiety. I had not spoken to anyone in my family since walking out that night. My father had called twice, leaving gentle voicemails, saying he was there when I was ready to talk but making no demands. My mother's silence was deafening, but not surprising. What did surprise me was the text I received from Sarah on the 6th day. "Can we talk, just us?" We arranged to meet at a cafe halfway between my apartment and her hotel. She was in town for business, she explained, but had extended her stay specifically to see me. When I arrived, she was already seated at a corner table. "2 cups of coffee waiting," she said as I sat down. "At least what used to be your usual vanilla latte, right?" I nodded, touched that she remembered such a small detail about me. "Thanks, how are you feeling?" I gestured vaguely toward her midsection. "Morning sickness is finally tapering off," she replied with a small smile. "But I did not ask you here to talk about the baby. I wanted to talk about what happened at Mom's birthday." I tensed instinctively, preparing for criticism or an appeal to apologize for ruining the evening. Instead, Sarah reached across the table and placed her hand on mine. "I am sorry," she said, her eyes sincere. I am so sorry that I never realized how much pain you were in or how my achievements were being used against you. I should have seen it. The unexpected apology caught me off guard. "It was not your fault," I said automatically. "You were just living your life, being successful." "Maybe," she acknowledged. "But I was not being a good sister." I knew Mom compared us, but I convinced myself it was normal parenting or that it would push you to find your own path. I never considered how damaging it really was. We talked for nearly 3 hours, truly communicating, perhaps for the first time in our adult lives. Sarah shared her own struggles with our mother's expectations, the pressure she felt to maintain her perfect image, and her genuine admiration for my creative talents, determination. "You know what is ironic?" she said, stirring the remnants of her 3rd cup of tea. "I used to be jealous of you." I nearly choked on my coffee. "Jealous of me? That is absurd." "Not at all," she insisted. "You always knew exactly what you wanted to do. You had this passion for design from the time you were little, and you never wavered. I fell into law because it was what was expected, what I was good at. But I never had that certainty, that fire you. I have." Her words shifted something fundamental in my understanding of our family dynamic. I had always seen Sarah as the golden child, effortlessly perfect and secure in her place. The idea that she might have envied aspects of my life had never occurred to me. "So what happens now?" I asked eventually. "With Mom." Sarah sighed. She is hurt and confused. "I do not think anyone has ever challenged her worldview like that before. Dad as well. Dad is finally standing up to her too. They are having a lot of conversations behind closed doors." As we parted with a genuine hug, I felt the first stirrings of hope that perhaps our relationship as sisters could evolve into something healthier, something based on mutual respect rather than competition. 2 days later, my father showed up at my studio during lunch break. I had texted him the address, but was still surprised to see him navigating the creative chaos of the comment workspace, looking simultaneously out of place in his button-down shirt, and immensely proud as he examined the sketches and fabric samples strewn across my desk. "This is where the magic happens, huh?" he said carefully, picking up a design board for my Fashion Week piece. "Something like that," I replied, self-conscious, but pleased by his interest. "It is usually not quite this messy." We went to a nearby sandwich shop where he asked thoughtful questions about my work before eventually steering the conversation to what we both knew. It was the real reason for his visit. "I owe you an apology, Danny," he said solemnly. "I should have protected you more. I knew what was happening, how your mother's comparisons were affecting you, but I took the path of least resistance. I would comfort you privately instead of challenging her publicly. You were always my supporter, Dad," I said, meaning it. "I do not know if I would have survived that house without you. Support is not enough when injustice is happening," he replied, his eyes sad. "I failed you by not being your advocate when you needed one. I am trying to make up for that now with your mother." He explained that my confrontation had forced both of them to examine painful truths about their parenting and their marriage. My mother, he was not having an easy time accepting her role in damaging our relationship, but she was at least beginning to question her behavior. "She may never fully understand," he warned. "She comes from a family where achievement was the only measure of worth, but she does love you, Daniela, even if she has a terrible way of showing it." The night before my Fashion Week debut, as I was making final adjustments to my piece, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from my mother, the first direct communication since the birthday dinner. "Good luck tomorrow. I know this is important to you." No effusive praise, no a declaration of having seen the error of her ways, but it was a small acknowledgement of my world on my terms. I replied with a simple "thank you," uncertain whether to add more, ultimately deciding that small steps were still progress. The morning of the showcase, I was a bundle of nerves and excitement. Emma had given me the day off to prepare, and the emerging designers had been allocated time for final fittings and adjustments before the evening event. My piece, a deconstructed evening gown that transformed through a series of strategic elements to reveal different aspects of its structure, represented everything I had been working toward. As I helped my model into the complex garment, checking each detail, obsessively, I tried not to think about who might or might not be in the audience. This moment was about my work, my vision, not about family approval or validation. The showcase itself passed, in a blur of lights, music, and adrenaline. Standing backstage, I watched as my creation moved down the runway, the audience reacting with appreciative murmurs as the model demonstrated the transformative elements of the design. Emma squeezed my shoulder in silent approval, and I felt a surge of professional pride, untainted by old insecurities. It was only after the showcase during the reception that followed that I saw them. My father was easy to spot his height, making him visible above the crowd. But it was the sight of my mother, beside him, that stopped me mid-con conversation. And next to her, Sarah and Michael, all of them scanning the room, clearly looking for me. Emma noticed my distraction. "Family?" she asked, perceptively. I nodded suddenly, nervous in a way the industry professionals had not made me. "Go," she encouraged. "I will cover for you with the buyers for a few minutes." I made my way through the crowd, my father spotting me first and waving. As I approached, I could see my mother was uncomfortable in this unfamiliar environment, her posture rigid and her smile tight. "You came," I said, the statement directed at all of them. But my eyes on my mother. "We would not miss it," my father replied, warmly, embracing me. "Your work was magnificent, Danny, truly special." Sarah hugged me next. "That dress was incredible. The way it changed on the runway. I have never seen anything like it." My mother stood slightly apart, taking in the scene around us. The fashion industry crowd so different from her usual social circles. Finally, she looked directly at me. "It was very creative," she said, her tone careful, as if she was trying to find the right words in a foreign language. The audience seemed quite impressed. Coming from her, it was practically a standing ovation. I noticed she was wearing the vintage scarf I had given her for her birthday, a small gesture that spoke volumes. Thank you for coming, I said. Sincerely, all of you. It means a lot. Emma Wilson spoke to us briefly. My father said she had remarkable things to say about your talent and future prospects. I saw something flicker across my mother's face, then perhaps the beginning of a realization that my path so different from Sarah's might hold legitimate value and success of its own kind. Is she important in your field? My mother asked hesitantly. Very, I replied, not elaborating, letting her sit with the knowledge that someone important valued my work. We did not have a dramatic reconciliation that night. There were no tearful apologies or profound declarations of change, but, as my mother prepared to leave, she paused, looking at me with an expression I had rarely seen directed my way. Your father and I would like you to come to dinner next week, she said. To talk, if you are willing. It was a small opening, a narrow crack in a very thick wall, but it was more than I had expected. I will check my schedule, replied, neither committing nor refusing. As they left, Sarah lingered behind for a moment. She is trying, she said quietly in her own way. The fact that she came tonight, that was a big step for her. I nodded, understanding that decades of entrenched behavior would not change overnight, if they changed at all. One step at a time, I agreed. Returning to the industry reception, I was surprised to find that the anxiety that had always accompanied thoughts of my family had diminished somewhat. Whether or not my mother ever fully accepted my choices or valued my achievements on their own terms, I had begun the process of truly valuing them myself, and perhaps that had been the most important piece all along. 1 year after my confrontation at my mother's birthday dinner, much had changed in my life. The exposure from New York Fashion Week had led to valuable connections and opportunities, eventually allowing me to leave Emma's team with her blessing to establish my own small design studio. It was hardly an empire, just a modest space with 2 part-time assistants, but it was mine, built on my creative vision and determination. My designs had gained attention for their innovative structure and sustainability focus, earning features in several industry publications. The financial stability that had eluded me for so long was finally within reach. Though I still lived simply compared to Sarah's lifestyle, my relationship with my family had evolved in ways both expected and surprising. My father and I grew closer than ever. His pride in my accomplishments now expressed openly and frequently. He had become a visitor to my studio, genuinely interested in learning about my creative process and the business aspects of my work. Sarah and I developed a relationship that, while still navigating occasional awkward moments, was founded on mutual respect rather than comparison. The birth of her daughter, my niece Lily, had brought a new dimension to our connection. I designed a special christening gown for the baby, incorporating subtle elements from family heirlooms, a gesture that moved Sarah to tears. I want Lily to know her, Aunt Sarah told me during one of our now regular sister lunches, to know that success comes in different forms and that finding your passion is what matters most. The most complex evolution, predictably, was with my mother. Our relationship remained a work in progress, with steps forward often followed by slides backward. The dinner she had invited me to after Fashion Week had been tense but productive, the first of many conversations where we attempted to understand each other better. I never intended to hurt you, she had said during that first dinner, her hands clasped tightly around her water glass. I thought I was motivating you to achieve your potential by constantly telling me I was not as good as Sarah. I had asked, trying to keep accusation from my tone, by showing you what was possible. She had replied genuinely, believing her logic. Sarah set such a high standard. I thought it would inspire you. It was clear that we viewed the same experiences through fundamentally different lenses. My mother had been raised in a household where achievement was equated with love, where comparison was considered motivation rather than destruction. Breaking through decades of this conditioning was not a simple process. There were still moments when she would contentious, make thoughtless comparisons, or dismiss my accomplishments in ways that stung. But there were also new moments, ones where she made visible efforts to understand my world on its own terms. She had started asking questions about design and fashion awkwardly at first, but with increasing genuine curiosity. She had even framed a sketch I had given her, displaying it prominently in their living room alongside Sarah's law school diploma, a small but meaningful gesture of equivalence. In my personal life, a unexpected reunion had occurred. 6 months after Fashion Week, I had literally bumped into Jason at an art exhibition, spilling his drink in a scene straight out of a romantic comedy. The years apart had matured us both. His a career as a graphic designer, having flourished while he developed a greater appreciation for pursuing passion over practicality. I was wrong before he admitted. During our first dinner catching up, I told you to compromise your vision for security, but watching you build something true to yourself has been inspiring. I should have supported you better. Our relationship rekindled slowly, both of us cautious after our previous ending, but there was a depth and understanding now that had been missing before. He understood my work ethic, my need to create on my own terms, and I appreciated his stability and thoughtfulness in ways my younger self had taken for granted. The most profound change, however, was internal. The confidence that had begun to emerge. The night I finally stood up to my mother had grown stronger with each passing month. I no longer measured my worth through comparison to Sarah or anyone else. I had built a life that reflected my values and vision, one where success was defined by creative integrity and personal fulfillment rather than external metrics. This new self-assurance allowed me to recognize that Sarah, too, had been a victim of our mother's expectations in her own way. The perfect daughter role had come with its own pressures and constraints. Our conversations revealed how she had sometimes envied my artistic freedom while feeling trapped by the very success that had earned our mother's approval. Learning to forgive my mother was perhaps the most challenging aspect of my journey. Not because she had made a complete transformation, but because I came to understand that true forgiveness was not about erasing the past or pretending the hurt never happened. It was about releasing its power over my present and future. You do not forgive for the other person. My therapist had explained during one of the sessions I had finally allowed myself to pursue. You forgive for yourself to free yourself from carrying the weight of resentment. This perspective helped me maintain boundaries with my mother while still allowing our relationship to evolve. As the night drew to a close and the last of the guests trickled out of the gallery, I stood among the remnants of an evening that had changed everything. My father's laughter still lingered in the air. Sarah's quiet support hummed in the background, and my mother's embrace, awkward, tearful, but genuine, still pressed against my heart. For years I had dreamed of her saying she was proud of me. Tonight I finally heard the words, but here's the twist. By the time those words left her lips, I realized I no longer needed them to define me. The little girl who once begged for validation had grown into a woman who had already claimed her worth. Her recognition was not my salvation, it was my victory lap. Later that night, alone in the quiet gallery, I turned back to the dress I had made for her. A piece born of memory, love, and resilience. My mother's tears had baptized it, but the truth was clear: it wasn't just her dress. It was mine. A symbol that I had transformed pain into art, comparison into individuality, silence into voice. I didn't need to be Sarah's shadow, nor my mother's unfinished dream. I was Daniela. Enough. More than enough. And as the gallery lights dimmed, I smiled at the thought. Sometimes the greatest revenge against years of comparison is not anger, not rebellion, but becoming so wholly yourself that no one can deny your light. So tell me, have you ever faced the weight of comparison? What did it take for you to finally break free? Share your truth in the comments below. And if my story struck a chord, like, subscribe, and pass it on because someone out there is still waiting to hear that they are already enough.